People who quit a job without notice. What was the breaking point? I worked 3 separate roles at a grocery store: stocking and delivery, produce, meat room. I had to punch out and back in for each role on separate time cards. I put in 60 hours a week, but couldn't get insurance because I was only part-time. Story 2. Let the new guy do literally all the work and shifts no one else wants. Mentality of all staff. There was not one friendly person who even spoke to me like a normal person. Story 3. They remodeled the office and situated the printers directly beside my workstation. It was a security firm, so they needed to essentially run the printers non-stop in order to process event logs for insurance purposes and things like that. And the position involved me having to be on the phone, so it was driving me mad trying to hear customers over the screeching and whirring. I spoke to management, wrote emails to the company president, and just got nowhere with it. One day, I just completely lost my crap. Hung up the phone, mid-conversation, pushed my chair back, stood up, tossed my ID badge on the desk, and walked out without a word, and never went back. Story 4. I was a cook at a famous highway-side restaurant who recently got excoriated for changing their logo. Pulled into the parking lot to start my 6 a.m. shift and saw 3 tour buses already parked. Rushed to the line where the opening cook was already frantically starting the second set of grills. We usually only ran 1 grill on weekdays, and throwing pans of grits and gravy on the steam line. I jump in and get to work. 5 hours later, we've been visited by 3 more tour buses. The ticket printer, which was mounted about 6 feet up on the wall, had tickets hanging all the way to the ground and coiled up in a little pile. Ticket racks over both grills were triple layered all across its 10 feet length. We were hip deep in cardboard boxes and dirty pans because we couldn't leave the line to take them to trash and dish. In walks the midday manager, who I'll call Napoleon. I'm 5'3" and female, and he and I could stand nose to nose. He immediately starts yelling at me about all the pans and boxes lying about. I turn to him and say, "I'm sorry, we're on our 6th bus since 6 a.m. and he immediately goes red in the face, gets in my face, and starts screaming at me. I immediately turn and walk off the line because I was about to deck the guy and needed to disengage and cool down real quick so I could get back to work and tune him out. Napoleon starts chasing me. "That's right, crybaby. Run away and cry, crybaby." I was not crying. "This is totally unprofessional. Get your ass back on the line, crybaby." Instead of just taking a quick moment to compose myself, I walked to my locker, grabbed my bag, and stormed towards the front. I give my fellow line cook an apologetic look and say, "Sorry, man, I can't take this crap anymore," and keep walking to the computer to clock out. Meanwhile, Napoleon is darting back and forth on the other side of the line, trying to find a way through as though we were playing tag and there was a table between us. "Don't you dare, Lila Bean. If you walk out of this kitchen, you're fired. That's it, you're fired." I froze, my fingers hovering over the computer screen halfway through punching in my number to clock out. I turn and give him a look. "Thanks, Napoleon." I finish punching out and storm out of the restaurant, drive straight home, and immediately file for unemployment. It got denied because they said I quit voluntarily. I appealed, said that I was fired, and that video surveillance should show him screaming, "You're fired," with a timestamp, which would occur before my clock-out punch. When pressed, I admitted to walking away from Napoleon due to his aggressive verbal assault, also shown on video, and I was escaping a frightening and toxic environment where men attack women. Propped my feet up, took a 2-week vacation while collecting my unemployment, and started looking for a job. Realized I no longer wanted to do restaurant work and decided to apply for a grant to go back to school. I've now been a paralegal for 15 years and I love it. Kind of hate the job I have right now, but I'm drinking my copium and enduring for now until I'm in a better position to get a better job. I've seen ads for jobs in my practice area paying double my current salary. And as soon as I'm able to get a car again, I'm outie. Story 5. My second job out of high school was at a video game rental store similar to, but not, Blockbuster. Every now and then, we'd have sales to clear out the old DVDs and games that weren't getting rented anymore. We had one that was going to occur during the Labor Day weekend, in which corporate stated all employees in the highest selling store would get a bonus. That weekend went by, we did our sales, and we waited for the results to see where we ranked. In less than a week, a letter was sent to the store informing us that we had won and that our next paycheck would include the bonus. Next paycheck came, and none of us had bonuses. Store manager contacted corporate to find out what gives. Corporate advised that the funds were sent to the district manager, DM, in order to payroll it to us. SM contacts DM, who advised that she didn't feel like we deserved it, and so she decided to give it to the newly opening store in the next county over as encouragement for the newly hired staff. DM refused to rectify the situation. SM called corporate back to file a complaint about it. A day or so later, Sem calls a store meeting in the middle of the day asking everyone to come in, as she had some very important information to tell us. Everyone showed up because we all expected it had something to do with the missing bonuses. After everyone arrives, SM explains that corporate is refusing to honor paying us the bonuses because the money was given to the DM to disperse. Once DM got it, she was allowed to give it to any store she wanted in the winning district. SM explained that after escalating it further, she found out that our DM was the company owner's sister-in-law, and he didn't want to start crap with her and make his wife mad. So essentially, we were all screwed out of a bonus that we were told we won. At that point, the SM said, "I don't know about all of you, but I'm done with this place." All the rest of us agreed. As many of us furnished the employee break room, everyone began grabbing their own stuff and taking it to our respective vehicles out front. I brought the table, someone else brought the microwave, etc. There was nothing in the employee break room that actually belonged to the company. So during all this, the store was still open and customers were coming in and out. Some actually stood around and listened to the entire meeting. We didn't care. As we were moving things out to our cars, a police officer who was a regular at the store stopped by because he thought it was odd for people to be moving furniture and appliances out of the store at 2:30 in the afternoon. One of the customers who listened in on the meeting explained to him what had happened as we continued to pack up our stuff. He volunteered to stand by as we vacated our property from the building in case there were any problems, like someone from corporate showing up. While we were doing this, we all signed letters of resignation. A few of the customers even wrote their own letters to share their disgust with the company and what they did to us. As a key holder, I dropped my store key in an envelope with my resignation. The SIM advised all customers to make their final selections as we were preparing to lock the doors. The few remaining customers finished up their letters or got whatever rentals they wanted. We turned off the lights, opened the return box, locked the doors, and dropped our keys in the return box. The SM was the only one to keep a set of keys so she could hand them over to the DM. Since we had the police officer standing by the whole time, he was able to verify that none of us had keys, except for the SM. I went home. About 30 minutes later, I get a call from the DM. She sounds panicked and upset on the phone. Since I was scheduled off that day, she didn't think I was part of the walkout. She asked me to, please, go open the store." I advised her I couldn't as I don't work there anymore. She hung up on me. A few minutes later, DM calls me again. She yells at me about being the only one nearby with a key and that I better have the store open in 5 minutes. I repeated, "I don't work there anymore, and besides, my key is in the drop box with my resignation. I couldn't open it even if I wanted to." She yells a tirade of curse words at me and hangs up again. Story 6. Realized I was being set up to be fired and they were trying to get every bit of work out of me as possible before doing it. Screw that. So I walked. I didn't need unemployment. This was when I could get a job within a week or two. And I did. Story 7. Long story. But here's how I quit my first career job. It is a personal property/title loan company and all but hated their employees and customers. They did everything they could to milk every penny out of their customers. They had HR policies specifically crafted to keep from offering any kind of benefit until after they worked there for 5 years. Then had an unofficial policy to fault find each employee that made it to 5 years so they could fire them. I worked in it. My boss quit when he found out that new managers were making 2-3x what he was BC. They made money, and his department, it was an expense. This was even after all he did to keep costs down to the bare minimum. Seriously, we spent way too much time maintaining crappy hardware and working on stuff just so they wouldn't have to spend actual money on needed upgrades. Instead of hiring a new ET manager, the VP over sales took over. And while we had a lot of work, there wasn't a need of a CS intern, as we didn't have a lot of new development going on. But the CEO decided to hire one, who just happened to be the kid of some close friends and a bartender at his country club. He was a total idiot, and it was obvious why he got the job. I berated him a couple of times, and was not kind when he couldn't follow directions. He left about a month before he was going to originally. But he left behind a stinker of a project that he never could get working. Again, BC, he was an idiot. A few months later, they hired another full-time developer. This kid took over the stinker project, but kept wasting time on unnecessary things, all the while blaming me for the crappy code in it not working. The guy all but refused to work with me. He especially didn't like it when I would ask to review his code. He wanted access to my code, but refused to check his in return. There were other problems, and we ended up getting written up for arguing right before Christmas. It was satisfying walking out in the middle of the argument BC. My day was over 30 in before his. During all of this, I kept asking to implement development processes such as Agile. I wanted to organize how we handled new features and bugs. I also wanted a prioritization we could follow with check-ins and other things. Anything to hold us accountable, mainly to resolve the issues, the conflicts between myself and the new dev. I was sending emails almost every day to get something in place. NADA in response. A couple of months after getting written up, we were going to have a demo. I asked him to commit his code so I could merge it. He told me he didn't want to. Not only that, but he hadn't worked on the stuff we agreed he would, but some other almost unused part of the app. So I locked him out of the source repo and went home. The next day I was called into my boss's office to explain, and I lied, saying I didn't do it. Then I locked him out again and went to lunch. When I got back, I was put on leave until the next week while they investigated. It was obvious I did it, but BC, they refused to actually build a secure network. There was enough doubt they wouldn't have been able to outright fire me. Over the weekend, I made up my mind to quit. I called my other coworkers to get them to bring in the stuff I'd lent them. Sunday evening, I wrote up my resignation letter. I got up Monday, re-reviewed the letter, and hit send. On the way into the office, my coworkers called to ask if I was coming in. BC, I was on admin leave and wasn't supposed to come into work. I then spilt the beans and said I was coming to get my stuff. Oh boy, were they pissed. I walked in, but instead of going to my desk, I went to the receptionist's desk and asked for the HR director and my boss. Then I waited. While I was waiting, they used the super secret code phrase for an intruder. No joke, everybody came looking and was making comments about stopping me. The HR director was beyond rude, even after I told her to go read her email. Then my boss walked in while I was cleaning out my desk, and you could tell he was very mad. Gone was any amount of pleasantness. I had a lot of fun unplugging all of my personal equipment and then confirming with the hardware guy that it as mine. I spent 4 months unemployed, but it was worth it. It's been almost 20 but I'm making 10x what I was back then. Heck, I almost doubled my salary with my next job. Story 8, I got a promotion. I had heard how toxic the culture at this company was, but I guess I lucked out with the leadership I was reporting to in the floor-level position. So it felt natural for me to accept a promotion to supervisory level under these same people. Things were improving. Some of the problematic employees had been canned, and everyone above me seemed intent on making things work, except the GM of the facility. My promotion was a brand new position created by corporate to help bridge the gap between themselves and the site. The directors of the department and my department manager all said I was doing great with it. But within weeks, the GM, top of the site level, started trying to push things that were well above my authority level onto me. He was messaging me outside office hours over really minor stuff and absolutely grilling me about it as I was just waking up or trying to wind down from the day. Worst of all, he raged out on me over problems that I hadn't even known existed or had any involvement in. I started looking for a new job after that last one. I tried to talk to everyone about it. My department manager only took on the problems himself, which didn't smooth anything over since the GM still viewed it as the same thing. The corporate director said, "We'll talk to him," with no evidence they actually ever did. And the GM had already made himself unapproachable with his unpredictable moods. Eventually, it got back to me that he basically said he didn't give a crap what the expectations were when the role was created, and I would do things his way, which put me into an unwinnable position when he was constantly going against the structure corporate wanted. After his second time going full rage mode on me for making a minor slip up this time and trying to correct it in the exact fashion he had told me to, I was already well past the point of being able to take him seriously. This time, he straight up told me that he knew the problems he was mad about were systemic to the company, and he expected me, the guy who had a newly created position that was only months old, that I would have to deal with them. But then told me he didn't care when I tried to explain what was going on behind the scenes. I realized there that was angling to fire me over his personal issues. I was close to talking myself out of job whenever I came into contact with him anyway. But he's also the type of turd who would get off on having security escort me out, so telling him off would probably only feed his ego. Instead, I waited for him to leave my office, then said goodbye to my coworkers and walked away. He tried calling me an hour later, and it felt so damn good to hit that reject button. Story 9. Over 30 years ago, I worked for a dying company. Once the president forgot the password to her computer, read Windows screensaver, so I used a trick to get around it and give her access again. A month or so later, my coworker had the same problem on her home computer. So I went over to her house and showed her the trick in case she ever got in the same situation again. A few weeks later, the president was out of office, and the coworker needed something off her computer, so the coworker used the trick I taught her to access it. A week later, the president tried to write me up for showing the coworker how to bypass the computer security. I tore it up and walked out forever. Story 10. Found out the restaurant owner was stealing tips from the cook's payout and buying substances with it. I was the chef and shared an office with him. Saw the substances in his desk when he was gone for lunch, and I talked to my staff about it. The whole kitchen walked out and we called the police about the seek. Turns out it was his third offense, and he was jailed for 10 months over it. Pro tip, don't mess with a chef and his cooks in a kitchen full or knives and fire. You might just get burnt. Story 11. Worked as a chef at a sorority. New head chef came in and accused me of lying about filling a fancy coffee, latte, espresso, hot chocolate machine in the morning and being bad at my duties when it ran out of beans and froth mix at noon. It was during midterms, when the girls literally live on coffee. I typically had to fill the thing 2-3x a day, and the girls would just pop their heads in to let me know the machine ran out so I could walk out and fill it up. Took 2 minutes tops if I had to open a new box of beans or something. They were not bothered in the slightest, as they understood that when there are 100+ girls using one machine that it runs out. It's not like it was a massive fridge-sized unit. It was something that fit on a countertop and was a bit bigger than a mini fridge. He asked how the coffee machine was doing. I said I hadn't checked in a few hours. Gets quiet, calls our manager. Our manager comes in asking, "What's up?" I have no idea what's going on, so I just make small talk. Then she says, "The head chef accused me of lying about filling the coffee machine up." She seems really confused as to why this is an issue at all. I explain I filled it that morning when I got in and hadn't checked it in a bit since I was prepping for lunch and dinner. Head chef steps in with this tirade about how it's literally impossible for the girls to have gone through that much coffee in the morning from 6 a.m. to noon. How I must be lying to cover my laziness. This was after I was spending extra time to get his crap in order once he arrived, as he 100% had untreated OCD and would flip out if the pots were not stacked in the right order, or if the convection oven wasn't shined to high reflective sheen every day. This was after I'd been diagnosed with carpal tunnel and trigger thumb in both hands. That was making work extremely painful every ducking day, and would only get worse with the work. This was also after he played buddy-buddy with me, trying to get me to talk crap about managers. That did not work, as my manager and I had a great working relationship. I did my job and didn't cause any issues, and she did her job and helped out whenever asked. Couldn't have asked for a better manager there. So, as she can see that this accusation of being lazy and lying over ducking coffee beans was not worthy of her time, she asks if I need to take the rest of the day off. I say no, I will finish my shift, and I do. Then I walk out, file into the family program through COSGovit website, and text them both, letting them know I will be on medical leave until my surgery is scheduled. Surgery was scheduled for 3 months out, with 10 weeks of recovery for full functionality. He quit within 2 weeks because he could not handle the kitchen on his own, and the replacement they hired would not put up with his OCD bullcrap. He also received a number of complaints from the ladies at the sorority for his negative and haughty attitude. Story 12. MSN dial-up internet access tech support in early 2000. At first, it was fine while they were bringing our call center up to speed. Then the metrics came into play. Call queue never dropping below 50. Average customer wait time was 40 minutes, with an average of 2 calls for resolution. So every customer was always pissed. We didn't have control over calls, so as soon as one ended, the headset would beep and we were on to our next. We were only allowed an 8-minute average call time. And if you went over, that would have your team leader hovering over your shoulder, listening in and pushing you to end the call. Much over 15, and the floor coordinator would be right beside him doing the same thing. We weren't allowed to wait during reboots, even if we knew there was another necessary step. We had to hang up the call, and they would have to call in again, wait on hold, and be even more pissed at the next agent, who hopefully read the notes you left on the call and knew what next steps were. On top of all that, you swiped your badge to get into the building, logged into an available workstation, logged into the call center software, and your phone. The time between each of these logins was tracked and actively monitored. Have to take a piss after walking into the building before finding an open workstation? It was noted, and you'd hear about it from your team lead. Bathroom breaks were only allowed on scheduled breaks. They wouldn't officially reprimand you, but you'd hear about it. Email was supposed to be read before you came in from home, so you could be aware of major outages. Again, they wouldn't officially do anything about it, but you'd know. At my 90-day review, I was given the largest raise they allowed at that point and written up for violating support boundaries in the same meeting. I walked a customer through a registry edit involving their modem driver. We weren't supposed to touch the registry, but I knew what the fix was for this stupid crap tie Win modem, and got off the call in the required 8 minutes rather than have him call in again and again, getting more pissed with every call. I was scheduled for a 7 p to 3 a shift one night and just said, "Duck that." I called the farmer I used to work for and asked if he needed any extra hands, and went back to shoveling cow crap and throwing hay. After about 2 weeks of ignoring calls, I finally went in to pick up my last paycheck. They asked me if I would do an exit interview, which I agreed to if they would do it right then. They actually tried to bring me back after no call, no showing for 2 weeks. That's how bad the turnover and burnout rate was. Even offered me a promotion to team lead, small pay bump, but significant to an 18-year-old. I said no, answered all their questions politely, told them why I left and what would be needed for me to consider working there again, and left. They closed completely within a couple of years. Friends I had that were still working there had their last paychecks bounce, and Microsoft outsourced the whole thing overseas. Story 13, TLDR. I was given a task that I had no business doing and thrown under the bus. I ran the help desk portion of my job, like 500 emails per day, that I had to read and redirect to one of 3 other workers in the small company, or answer myself. And I was always told that if any internet issues or server issues come in, Then that goes to guy, always and forever. Until one day, an internet issue pops up at one of the 30 places we manage for its support. It's a smaller clinic, and the internet has been down since they arrived, an hour before we even start work. The clinic didn't want any monitoring software put in place, even though my boss had offered it. That way someone would see if their internet goes down and work a plan on how to get them back up. But they did not want that. So I'm told to call the lady who is having a real panic and have her check something. Well, it's not going that way. I call her up and she's demanding we send someone over to fix it. Not possible. I can't leave the building, and like hell if my boss or his wife would make the 30 minutes drive, and the other guy's in another state. No way in hell anyone can make it. I'm being told by the guy in the other state to ask her to ping the firewall from any computer, but she refuses to do anything and says, "The internet is down, what's that gonna do?" So I'm struggling. I don't ever handle these internet issues, so I'm trying to look in the shared OneDrive folder for any information to use or somehow fix it. There are photos of the internet room in that building, just modems and firewalls and switches screwed into the wall, but nothing I can use to get her off her ass to do some work. 40 minutes have passed and I haven't helped this panicked lady at all. Boss tells me to just tell her the other guy will call her shortly and hang up. The guy who actually does internet issues solves it in 5 minutes, because he told her to reset the firewall and reseat the power plug. The building is back up and running with internet, so they can finally process customers' payments. She then writes a lengthy email saying how I, the guy who called, didn't sound very confident on what to do, yay no crap lady, and that she wasn't sure why we didn't have a backup plan in place for their business. Thankfully, my boss tore her a new one. Professionally, how she didn't want any extra software to track the internet down, and if we did see their internet go down, who would take that 3 a.m. phone call and go into the office? Her? Her boss? No one, because you guys didn't want that service, so it wasn't implemented. I got thrown under the bus in that email, even though I was always told to hand over any internet issues to the other guy. I started job search king that very day, and a few months later, eventually just quit without notice on a Monday morning. Story 14. It was a dispatch center for a wildlife removal company. The rules kept changing, almost daily. Turnover was wild. Eventually, it got to the point where I was in a constant state of panic. From the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed, I lost a tremendous amount of weight and my health tanked. It got to the point where I began to contemplate died. Finally, the breaking point came when my manager wrote me up with a final warning. That was it. I quit on the spot, and my health immediately began to recover. I was out of work for only about 2 weeks before I started my next job. Story 15. I was processing disability claims for a big corp, and I had a guy who was clearly disabled. Film, photos, and half a dozen doctors signing off that this dude's legs were like rotting, and he was actively gearing up for surgeries. He kept getting denied over and over. Every appeal was getting sent back to me with some corp doctor saying it was exaggerated or not disabling. He was furious, calling multiple times daily, demanding answers and threatening to sue me by name, and I wasn't allowed to defend myself or avoid him in any way until it became a legal fight, which was the very end of the appeal process. My boss refused to take his calls from me, insisting I should have the skills to de-escalate him. My other files suffered, my metrics all tanked, and I had people from other departments sending me condolences as they were forced to transfer him. My frontline call center folks, may their pillows be eternally cool, tried to defend me because of how nice I was to them. But the caller was smart and knew how to get back into the queue while his call was being transferred. Finally, one day I was coming back from lunch and I had a full panic attack just looking at my phone to set myself active in the system. He knew when I was mandated to take lunch and would call within 2 minutes of my clock in. I knew I would have no recourse or support and would be dealing with at least an hour of abuse. I unplugged my phone and called my boss through Teams, said I couldn't do it anymore. She tried to convince me to find another spot in the company, but I'd seen enough of their practices to know it would eventually be something else, so I just told her it wasn't a possibility. Looking back, I don't even blame the guy that much. The rage was misplaced, but he was legitimately being ducked and I never found out why. He was salaried too, and didn't have a union to fall back on. So in addition to my anxiety, I also had a lot of empathy. Story 16. In 2002, I worked at a Sonic for 3 hours. I was making a solid $4.95 an hour job. Had all the telltale signs of a crepe hole job, stupid uniform, zero training, and a mandatory video of a white girl rapping about washing your hands. But credit where credit is due. The people made me quit, not the institution. I remember asking questions and people blinking at me, only to realize there were stickers everywhere, with simple instructions on how to do everything after about 15 minutes. I was just looking at stickers on how to change the deep fry oil or how to make a Texas tornado ass blaster, etc. It was simple. It's still very hard work anyway. Manager tells me to mop the floor instead of asking questions. I look around and lo and behold, there's a sticker above a door that says mop closet. I walk over, open the door, and duck me. There's a mop inside a mop bucket. Just gotta fill this get up. I take that crap out, and right outside the mop closet is a machine on the wall, labeled mop water machine. It had a clear hose dangling off of it that almost reached the floor, and only one green button that's it. I put the hose in the bucket, hit the button, and presto, it filled the mop bucket with steamy, soapy water and automatically shut off when the bucket was full. Holy crap, technology, it's amazing. So I get to town mopping this greasy-ass floor, dodging the felons that were flipping burgers. Like pros, manager comes up to me and says, "You made the mop water wrong," I told her. "The machine only has one button, and if it was important, they would have made the white girl rap about it in the training VH. She didn't like that at all, and told me she didn't like my attitude. I told her, "If you want me to mop the floor a certain way, you should show me how to do it." She didn't like that either. I said, "You know what? No harm, no foul. I'm just gonna quit." She said, "You won't get your check till you turn in your uniform." I was wearing a shirt and a hat, so I took off my shirt and my hat and acted like I was gonna hand it to her. But before she grabbed it, I threw it in the deep fryer and said, "Whoops." 12 long years passed. I got a $9 check from Sonic in the mail. It is now framed on my bedroom wall. Best night out I ever made. Story 17. It was my last job ever in retail. Our grocery store had a general manager and 2 assistant managers. I was one of the assistant managers. I know I'm my own narrator here, but generally most of our employees loved me and disliked my co-assistant. Corporate felt the opposite. They definitely favored her over me. Her and I got along well because neither of us had any power over the other, and we had both started with the company around the same time, so equal seniority. Corporate decided to shift a couple of responsibilities from our GM to her, and this gave her just a bit of power of me. I knew why no one liked her, so I was not happy about it. She was given free rein to write everyone's schedule, including mine and the GM. The GM had sort of a set schedule, but still room for her to play with. I was suddenly the closing manager for every shift I worked. Before that, her, the GM, and I always rotated the closing shifts. The first week it happened, she gave me some bullcrap excuse as to why it had to be. I told her I'd do it, but not to schedule me like that again. The next schedule comes out, same thing. I told her, our GM and our district manager, if it happened again, I would quit. Sure enough, next schedule comes around and it happens again. And it was the first week of November, which for our store was always our 3rd busiest week of the year behind Thanksgiving and Christmas. I waited until about an hour before my shift was supposed to start, called the GM and told him the schedule had to be revised. It was either going to be revised with a more fair rotation or without me on it altogether. He tried to talk me into working the schedule and promised it wouldn't happen again after this. I told him I'd already heard that, so promises meant nothing. I quit and then ignored every call I got from him and corporate for the rest of the weekend. Within the next month, both the GM and my co-assistant got fired. The district manager called me asking me to return, but by then I had already moved on. I was at that store for a little over 5 years, and every year we were the store in our state with the lowest amount of employee turnover. After I quit, the store lost all but one longtime employee. Before the holidays were over in Story 18, it was not discussed with me, but I was to move into my boss's role, take on their responsibilities while they stayed at the organization, and replace the only part-time help we previously had because they were leaving. I would be going from 3 staff members and some volunteers to just myself and volunteers. My boss was also a nightmare person. The whole staff was walking on eggshells because of them, and I was their only underling. It was not good. The office manager tipped me off that in addition to this, I was only going to receive the standard 3-meal raise. I was passionate about the work, decently good at the job, and had just went to a conference for training. I felt awful, but was barely hanging on before they pulled this move. So I quit by email the Friday I pieced this together. I did give 2 weeks notice though. Did an exit interview with my boss's boss. Went for drinks with everyone at the office except Nightmare Boss. I was well-liked and a good employee. I just left before the start of a new season and my boss was stuck holding the bag. I knew the person who replaced me that season. They only lasted 2 months in the job, and when they left, the first thing they did was call me to tell me they were sorry that they didn't believe me. They couldn't fathom how bad it was. And that is how I found out my boss made sure I didn't get the job I applied for after I left. They found out I applied for another job, despite not listing them as a reference. Anyone else in the organization would have vouched for me, but they got the opportunity and took it upon themselves to run name into the ground. I don't know how many times they did this. I don't know how bad the damage is even 10 years later. They had a lot pull in my local industry and my career hit a wall. It sucked. Knowing what I know now, I don't regret quitting. I regret ever taking the position. It changed the whole trajectory of my life. I still wonder if I'll ever be able to turn the page and put that experience behind me. Story 19. Boss called me up to belittle me over taking care of something that was affecting several other people and that I did not do a recurring task that a teammate could have and should have done for me while I missed a day out sick. I also shared this task with that teammate, and would just do it for them anytime I noticed they had a heavy workload. This was months after I was getting dragged for every and any little thing. I thought I prioritized the right thing and got tore up for it verbally. My spouse happened to FaceTime me immediately after the call, and instead of saying anything else, she just said, "What's wrong?" I saw how shell-shocked I was in the FaceTime view of me, and knew in that moment I was leaving that day for the last time and not coming back. This was in the morning, and I at no point whatsoever doubted that I would resign at the end of the day. I have not recovered from this years later now, financially, and it really affected me deeply because my career trajectory had been promotion or upwards transfer every few years. I really did want to shine and find ways to stand out until the end there, and I just gaff about being successful anymore, career-wise, because it just got me tangled up in crafty admin. When I was close to breaking through to what might have been a rest of my career-type position, only to have my boss turn on me and cut at me for any little thing. People suck. I'm in a better place, and things have happened since then, for the better, that may not have if I stayed. I don't know how to get over the mental block or scar or whatever to be a star employee again. I want to, but I just can't focus on being productive for the life of me. I don't regret getting out because it was negatively impacting my home life. It was ultimately better to go, but life has not really let up enough to start to get ahead financially since. And it just really crafty. I couldn't have kept doing a job I was good at and enjoyed. Story 20. I was on leave at the same job my boyfriend works, and still works actually. I'd gotten a severe case of COVID, and while I was ill, boyfriend broke his ankle in 3 places. I got 2 weeks of COVID leave, as was company policy at the time. Then I burned all 5 weeks of PTO that I had. I was doing better aside from being exhausted all the time, and boyfriend was now at the stage where he was allowed to put weight on his leg, though not walk, but still required help for everything except for using the toilet. So I was basically his caregiver. I got an actual leave of absence approved. I also noticed that my desire to drink almost completely disappeared, as well as the heart palpitations I'd had for 3 years. So I decided to use my spare time to look for a new job. I was obviously happier not going to my job. Then one day, I get a text message that said, "Your schedule has been updated." So I looked and behold, I was suddenly added to the schedule. It was 4 a.m., so I couldn't ask what was up, and I wound up having a really bad anxiety attack. That morning, I also got a letter that said if I didn't come back by that Monday, it's Saturday, that I was going to be considered to have abandoned my job. They'd gone back on my leave of absence and didn't tell me. Boyfriend still needed help. I couldn't leave him, so I didn't go back. About a month later, he was reasonably independent. He could at least get himself drinks and a snack. I found myself a temp gig at a local company, and it had some issues at the beginning. But I wound up with a different temp gig in the company, being the CEO's assistant for more than twice what I got paid at the grocery store. That lasted almost a year, and then I wound up with a permanent job in the company at the facility 2 minutes from my house. It doesn't pay as high as being the CEO's Karen, but I'm so much happier, and my travel time is basically 0. Story 21. I worked as a hospital secretary on a unit with mostly elderly patients. There was a policy of having only 3 sick days a year. Nurses were coming in sick with the flu, wearing masks, but still obviously caring for patients and families were complaining. I had to take a 4th sick day, and I was written up and threatened with dismissal. I was fed up by this time, so I just walked out, turned my badge into horror on my way out, and that was it. Story 22. I worked at a steakhouse when I started college. I'm a city, a few hours away from anyone else I knew. I took the bus to and from work every day. I needed my schedule to line up with the bus schedule. My boss agreed on making it work with quitting time, but refused to adjust my starting time. This left me getting to work over an hour early every day, and then just sitting in a booth until I could clock in because while my city has public transit, it operated on a 1.5-hour basis. Fine, I'll make it work. Then, after I'd been there a few months, out of nowhere, he told me I couldn't leave. I needed to stay late and help out. I asked him if he'd give me a ride, and he said, "No, not my problem." Luckily, a cool offered to give me a ride home, so I stayed, but I told boss man this couldn't happen again because if I missed that bus, there were no buses after it, and if he left walking miles home after dark, getting home super late and risking my classes because of being tired. It literally happened again the next day. He told me I needed to stay and help out. I asked him for a ride, and he said no. The cool who gave a ride the day prior wasn't working, and no one else could or would give me a ride. So I worked until my normal quit time, then clocked out and left so I could make it to the bus. The dude blew up my phone. Just one screaming message after another telling me how unprofessional I am and how he had to stay late to cover my shift instead of going home. I decided right there that I wouldn't be going back. The next day, I took the bus into town to apply for jobs. Dude started blowing up my phone about 30 minutes after my start time asking where I was. I just ignored it. My family talked a lot of crap about how I quit, but I just didn't give a duck. Story 23. Operations manager for a senior and home age company, reporting to the president of the company, who in turn reported to the owner. Spent 2.5 years managing direct support staff, nurses, staffing team, and HR. And after hours on call on my own, without blinking an eye, total about 110 total staff. Finally started to burn out and also started experiencing issues in my marriage. Went to my boss about needing support so I didn't have work and home burning me out. And the solution was to hire a supervisor and take the entire operations and staffing team from me, except the nurses. And that supervisor was not also to report to the president. That was the start and a slap in the face. Owner of the company basically stopped talking to me, assuming he thought I was weak. Supervisor they hired was basically doing my job with a lesser title and also struggling immediately. Bad structure that president wasn't willing to fix. At the same time, the CFO started acting out as the owner of the business was selling to our direct boss, the president of the company, and shared exploding on everyone because she didn't want to our boss to now be the owner and didn't respect her. Made it extremely toxic. The president of the company was extremely stressed and crabby all of the time. Walked out at 3:30 p.m. every day while we all struggled. After having to leave work due to personal reasons, my marriage, and coming back the next day, my boss was on PTO and the CFO was so rude to me that I had enough. I walked to my office, sent my boss an email with my resignation, and walked out. I came back the following Monday to have a meeting with my boss to explain why, packed up, and left. I went through about 2 months of feeling scorned and hateful. During that time, my previous team members also left, and they have since started from scratch with a whole new team. I'm now employed somewhere else and starting to move on and be more at peace at the end of that journey. Story 24. New doctor here from Pakistan. My internship started in here. On the first day of the internship, they suddenly changed the timing from the previous 9 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. to 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. They then told us they were lowering our salaries, increased our on-call hours, straight working from one day to the next. On my third day of ER, I did a 30-hour straight shift, and there was no senior consultant attending because they took leave to celebrate the holiday of Independence Day on August 14th. It was just me and a senior medical officer who was also on a 24-hour shift who did take some rest to sleep for 6-8 hours. I single-handedly was managing the ER extremely well, even though it was just at the start of my house job. I only got 4 hours of sleep. When I got done with my 30 hours of ER, I decided I'm not continuing with this insanity crap because nowhere do they do this. And I thought to myself that I single-handedly managed an ER for hours on end by myself. And these administrative duckers can't even cater to my single request of reducing the day-to-day working hours to how they previously were. So I resigned without even informing the crap department that was moving towards asking people to do 30-hour shift every other day from the rate at which new internists, house officers, were resigning. We started with 35 house officers, and after 10 days, there were 8. Medical director and principal just laughed at our request and told us that if you have a problem with these new policies, then just resign. What I managed single-handedly. The day before, there were 2 people together who just got overwhelmed, and one of them just ran home. I got a chest infection after my 30-hour shift, and it took me 2 weeks to properly recover. As a new doctor, I've come to realize how actually valuable my skills are, and that I shouldn't devalue my work or think that just about anyone can do it. Story 25. After getting let go for no reason at a towing gig that was constantly playing games, story for another time, I filed for unemployment for the first time in my life. I hoped it would help with bills since I literally just signed a new lease on a place. The UE office worker actually asked me if I just wanted the handout or if I was interested in finding new employment. He then mentioned about all of these certificate programs available that I could qualify for grants for. Vet techs, beauticians, nursing stuff, etc. Then, I see a section for CDL training. I already had recently gotten my CDL permit on my own and was hoping to move up to heavy towing with a CDL. I jumped through all their hoops and qualified for full paid tuition and extra funds to cover my bills and ensure I could get to job interviews. My first CDL job was with a huge construction contractor. I drove water trucks, dump trucks, belly dumps, and heavy equipment. Then randomly, the foreman started saying they didn't need a truck driver on some days and would just tell me to park the truck and jump in with the ground crew, literally digging ditches by hand. I loathed the fact that I did all the work to better my employment opportunities, but helped out where I could, expecting to get transferred to other projects as a CDL driver. Then, it soon became obvious that the ditch digging was going to be 95% of my offered work. Contacted HR myself to discuss, and they didn't offer any job site transfers. After 2 months of trying to get back into a truck, I just quit. Moved across the country for another local truck driving offer, and more than doubled my previous pay. 0 requirements to get out of the truck, and a solid 80% of the day is just sitting parked waiting to load or unload and play on my phone until it is time to clock out. Easiest gig I've ever had. Story 26. This is a doozy. I had worked for my previous employer for 7 years. My employment there was no walk in the park by any means. My employer was extremely hard to work for and created a toxic environment. But it was a serving job, the money was good, and my coworkers were cool for the most part, so we could deal with it. We found out that someone we knew in town turned out to be a convicted SX offender of minors. This person was a casual acquaintance of my boss and worked next door. I was extremely bothered by this news because I had put someone in prison for this same crime, so I had all kinds of trauma resurface. I did all I could in our small town, going to the places he frequented, telling them what he did with proof in the hopes to run him out of town. My boss got wind of this and was extremely upset with me and was talking crap behind my back. It got to a point that it started to affect my work because my mental health took a toll. I tried explaining this to my boss when we had a meeting, and I left that meeting feeling good that they finally understood where I was coming from and why I was so uncomfortable with him and what he did and how those people never change. I get to work the next day and he's sitting at the fucking bar just chatting it up with my boss. My blood was boiling. I was shaking and I felt sick, and worst of all, I felt like an idiot for believing they understood me. I went up to my boss after he left and said, "What the fuck?" They said, "I didn't know he'd still be here when you got here. Sorry." I wish I could say I walked out on the spot. But no, I worked my shift that day, but texted my boss after and told them to take me off the schedule. Story 27. Art director pulled me into a room to have a talk. Proceeded to ask me why I ignored his instructions. I replied, "You asked me to do XYZ, and that's what I did." He replied back, "No, I didn't." We were the only two people in this room he pulled me into. The door was closed. He's a grown man that just blatantly lied, denied something to my face we both knew to be true. I can fathom someone lying when others are present to preserve face, but to do it when you are pulled into a room of their choice, it was very bizarre. I may be failing to describe it, but to be more clear, this wants something of semantics. He had given me an art task. The concept painting had a character depicted. We were weeks into the production of this character, and he recently decided to task me with detouring from the torso concept and do a specific treatment to the sculpt for that torso. I should have requested a new concept, although I can see that would have caused problems too. So I did what he asked. If my memory serves me correctly, this was over a decade ago, I told him they wouldn't like it, but he insisted. So after the review, they didn't like it. That's when he pulled me into a room for his talk. That was on a Friday. I partied all weekend long, mulling over my thoughts on the situation. On Monday, I walked in on time and wrote an email. Notice of my immediate resignation. Key card on desk, good luck. Difficult decision. I knew it wasn't smart and no one would understand, but I had worked with this guy on a different task for cover art for a magazine, and he's a complete piece of crap that took credit for most of it. I could tell her was setting me up. The straw was the lie to my face when it served no purpose, no witnesses. I found it creepy. Story 28. Guy I worked with had a real short fuse, and he just wouldn't communicate effectively. We worked in a loud shop. I couldn't hear what he was mumbling, ever. No one could. We'd constantly have to ask him to speak up, and we needed to hear what he was calling out to do our jobs. One day, he had enough of being told I couldn't hear him, and he, very loudly, cussed me out and threatened me. He's tried to fight a customer before and still kept his job. So I took him at his word. I told the boss that I'd be happy to come back to work if that guy was gone. They didn't fire him and let me walk. Okay then, it was a safety issue. So I collected unemployment for 7 months while looking for a new job. I ended up in a job I really like on a technology campus that is legendary in the automotive world and pays really well. Last month, I get a message from the boss at the last place. They wanted me back and made sure to mention that the hothead was gone with no chance of coming back. I did really like that job and was pretty bummed with the way it all worked out. I still miss the shop and the people I worked with a lot, but I genuinely landed in a much better position for myself. So I won't leave, but it's very nice to feel validated in knowing I made the right call. Story 29. I had been cooking for about 6 months at a golf course. The golfing season was ending here, and I was told I could either get laid off in a month or transfer to the casino to cook there. Said I'd like to be transferred. Boss says, "All right, you're more than welcome to return here once the season starts again." Weeks go by. I haven't received paperwork or a confirmation of transfer or anything. Keep asking the chef. He keeps saying, "Yeah, I did, we'll get it done. Don't worry." My last day comes, still no info. I say, "Duck it, I'll take a little time off, relax, go on a weekend vacation with my friends and then girlfriend." That Saturday, I get a random phone call. I almost don't answer, but when I do, it's the head chef for the casino. "Where are you? Today was your first shift. You need to get in here." I explained that I was never informed of my successful transfer, nor had I been given or informed of a schedule, and that I wasn't going to be available the rest of the weekend. Dude is pissed. Tells me I had better show up on Monday. I decide duck it. Bad start, but we'll see how things go. Get in on Monday, informed that I'm not cooking, I'm in the dish pit. The chef has nothing positive to say to me. Basically, you can wash dishes or you can leave. It was absolutely horrible. I made it 2 weeks before the environment got so toxic that I just dropped what I was doing and walked out the back door. The chef was aggressive with me. The cooks were all rude and micromanaging. Genuinely, some of the worst work days of my life. I haven't returned to kitchen work since. 6 years of experience, mostly wasted and thrown out. Story 30. Worked for a geophysicist years ago, doing secretarial, map stuff, and light bookkeeping. It was just he and I in a small company. I got in a bad car wreck and had to take several weeks off to heal. When I was getting ready to come back, he told me he was going to have to let me go as he needed someone with more accounting experience. He hired someone, supposedly with that experience. I was bummed, but went in to train her, as I wanted a good recommendation when job hunting. This was before computers and I had a brand new IBM Selectric typewriter that I was extremely proficient using. When I opened the door to greet her, in walked this blonde bombshell with huge kachangas, tight sweater, the whole bit. IF was in my early 20s at the time. I sucked up my initial reaction and showed her around the office. When it came to showing her the typewriter, she laughed and said, "Gee, I don't even know how to type." I instantly went back to my boss's office and told him to duck off, gathered my stuff, and left. A few days later, I applied for unemployment, but had to go on an interview for a receptionist or secretarial position for a small engineering R&D company. I really hit it off with the office MGR and the VP. The interview went great, but when they asked me if they could contact my last employer for a reference, I was crestfallen, but decided to tell them exactly what happened. She hired me on the spot. They put me through school and I received a computer science degree while working for them. After getting my bachelor's, I moved into a technical position with a big raise. I was with them for 15 years. Story 31. Back in college, I worked at an apartment complex doing basic maintenance, painting units, etc. It was a chill job because you come and go as you please, and people left you alone. As long as the jobs got done, was the motto of the manager lady and head maintenance guy. First year went great. Then the second year, a Karen lady and King Boomer took over the same week as manager and maintenance guy. She was a disaster. Always frantic, never organized, and couldn't use the computer to save her life. He was something else. Just sat in the workshop listening to RW radio or did actual maintenance. Always pissed about something. One day I was vacuuming the interior hallways as I always do once a week. I turned around and both are standing there. They tear into me at the same time about not working, while I'm in the middle of vacuuming and not doing this or that job. King Boomer said to Karen lady, "It's either me or him, but one of us won't be here tomorrow." I said, "Don't bother picking, pick for you." Dropped the vacuum and left. A month later, I went back to pick up my final paycheck, and a new girl was working as a manager. She said both were fired for drinking on the job when the head bosses showed up unexpectedly. Story 32. I worked as front office manager for a large hotel in our town. We were severely understaffed when I started, and the HR director made it nearly impossible to hire anyone. Applicants would have to go through 3 rounds of interviews. Automatic no's for anyone who didn't smile enough, anyone who didn't bring their own pen or provide a paper copy of their resume. Lots of arbitrary requirements. We're in a college town and most applicants were 18-20 looking for their first job. So as a salaried employee, I worked 16-hour days, 6 days a week, and an 8-hour day on the 7th. I would frequently need to come back in for the overnight shift to help out of. There was something special going on. We had a relatively new night auditor. She's been there maybe 2 months. I worked a couple long days, 16, 18 hours, and was exhausted. There was a weird thing that happened with a group check-in during the night shift, and the manager on duty was from maintenance and had no idea how to fix it. Instead of calling the dedicated help desk at 3 a.m., the night auditor called me. I didn't pick up. So she called the GM, my direct manager, who had her call the help desk, who solved the issue. The next day, I was written up for not answering the phone when I wasn't on call. After I'd worked an 18-hour shift for the 3rd or 4th day in a row, I went to my office, wrote up my resignation, handed it to HR, and went home and slept. This place was so poorly mismanaged. They had an almost entire turnover of management twice in 1 year. Story 33. Small real estate law office that kept taking on more work than it could handle and not hiring enough people to handle the increase. I told them I was overwhelmed with the email demands, up to 75 plus a day, all requiring anywhere from a quick reply to a 30-minute deep dive response, and this kept me from processing files. Office manager said, for an entire week, just ignore the emails, all of them. Cue very angry phone calls days later, a lot of them. I was blamed for my department's failure. Everything was fine before I was hired. I started at the beginning of March. This was mid-July. And at my June 90-day review, the same man gave me stellar reviews. I was bawling my eyes out as he blamed everything on me. Told me I had 30 days to change my act. Went home, got a random email from Indeed that new jobs had been posted in my area, including my. They posted my job on Indeed and typed up a resignation letter, went in early, grabbed my crap, and left. Best update is 5 months later. 3 months of just chilling at home, recovering from the insane abuse from this awful job, and 2 months of interviews. I started another job making $10K more a year, plus great benefits. 3 years later from that, and I'm making double the old job, gave me an amazing benefits. Love my team, love my job, life is great. Story 34. I was working as a retail manager. We had a large amount of turnover on our management team. To make sure the store was covered, the store manager put us on 80-hour-a-week schedules. We were salaried, so no OT. A month after this happened, our area was hit with massive thunderstorms that caused a 100-year flood. I, along with one other manager and an hourly employee, were the only ones to make it in that day. We didn't have any customers due to the flooding, so I used the day to work stock and try to clear the back room. The Saturday after this was my first day off in 2 weeks. Around 10 a.m., I get a call from the store manager saying that another manager called off and I needed to come in. Their justification was this would make up for the flood day when I didn't do anything. In their eyes, since there were no sales that day, no one did any real work. I drove out to the store and walked in wearing shorts, a t-shirt and sandals. They met me at the door saying I couldn't work wearing that. I said, I know, I don't plan on working. Told them the 80-hour work weeks and general lack of respect for employees would no longer work for me. I handed over my keys and turned to leave. As I left, they yelled that I couldn't do this. I replied over my shoulder, ducking, watch me. By the time I got home, my answering machine, this was before cell phones, had 4 messages pleading me to come back. I took great delight in erasing those messages. Story 35. Did it with my retail job years ago after a manager called and screamed at me at my other job on the company phone line because one hanger on one rack was slightly out of place when she opened the store that morning. It was the last straw. They were constantly on me. BC, I was too bookish, not perky enough. Wouldn't go to the bar with them on my day off. Refused to babysit their kids. Yeah, they used the part-time girls as free labor when the store was closed so managers could go party. So I was just kind of done before I threw my store keys at them and walked out. This was before the world of direct deposits for checks. They held my last check for 4 months and refused to mail it. Told other staff that when I came in the store to pick it up, there would be a come-to-God meeting. So I wrote a lengthy letter to corporate headquarters with dates for everything. I kept records of all the BS from locking my textbooks in the manager's locker so I couldn't study on my lunch break to the jump up and down tantrums that manager had in the store and the threats she was sending her part-time staff to deliver after I quit. I had my check in the mailbox within a week of their receipt of that letter. The store manager wasn't there anymore shortly thereafter. Story 36. Not me, but a coworker I convinced to walk out. At my first job after college, turnover was scary high. Boss man would hire 3 or 4 people a month, and I only ever saw 2 of them come back for a second shift. So you'd think that Bossman would treat the few rare gems who did stick around with some decency. But he was routinely horrible to everyone except his second in charge. One of the 2 people who stuck around was a high school kid, really cool, great attitude, hard worker, eager to learn. I liked her a lot. Boss man hated her and seemed to enjoy making her cry. He would give her the worst jobs and then find any problems he could with the work, and then scream at her for 10 or 15 minutes at a time. I couldn't shield her from it because I'd only been there 3 months myself and had 0 power over anything. But I tried to take over the more public-facing jobs so that she could clean the stockroom and the back and wouldn't feel embarrassed about crying in front of people on top of everything else. After like 2 weeks, I just pulled her aside and told her that no job was worth this, that she was a great worker and could easily find a job that would treat her better and pay her more than $9 an hour. We talked for a bit and then she walked out and never came back. Bossman didn't notice she'd left, but I got yelled at for standing around chatting. It was worth it. I'm proud of that kid. I hope she's doing well now. Story 37. So I had worked with the company for 3 years, and my specific contract was ending. So they did the right thing of finding a job for me in another department. The training was 3 weeks, and it was clear early on that the job was fine, but everything was a downgrade. Pay was a little less. I tried to negotiate, but the contract rate was set. The schedule was a bit more erratic, and I had to work in the office instead of from home. So after 2 weeks of training, I was about to move on to the final part of the training, and I called my boss and said, let's just call it, I don't like any part of this job. He asked if I wanted to work my 2 weeks, and I said to him, if you tell me I have to, then I will. But here's the thing, I have 2 weeks left and one of them is full-time training, and the second is a week on my own being monitored by a trainer. It really just feels like a waste of everyone's time for me to work out my 2 weeks. He said he needed to check with HR because of the oddity of that. All he came back and said, yea, they agreed that it's pointless to force you to work it out. Story 38. A long time ago now. Working at a store in my 3rd year. Had been working full-time, was very responsible, and was usually the one to train new hires. May long weekend was coming up, and usually the full-timers get it off and the newer hires have to work it. The manager holds a staff meeting a month earlier stating he needs all hands on deck. No one gets the weekend booked off. I already had camping plans with friends, but the manager says no. I need you here. we'll have pizza after. The long weekend comes, and I can't help but notice I was the only full-timer. There were 3 of us working when I showed up on the Saturday morning. A couple of the new hires were also off. This set me off. I find the manager and tell him I'm going home. He asks what's up, as he can see I'm unusually mad about something. I explained to him the situation, and as I did, I grew even angrier. I bent over backwards at that place. I started in one department, but became proficient in others as well. I had a diverse knowledge of the store. That's when I decided, duck it. I told him I'm done. He asked if I was giving 2 weeks notice. I said I don't need 2 weeks. I'm out right now. I told him to call me when my final pay and profit-sharing check was ready to be picked up, said thank you, and left. I picked up a check for $7,000 the next week and took the summer off. That was in 1998. Story 39. I worked for a sandwich place back in college. I continually got passed over for promotion by people who had been working there less time than me because the store manager didn't like me and thought I was too crass. This isn't just me thinking this because my feelings were hurt. She legitimately told me this to my face when I asked her why I was being passed over for a 3rd time. She finally ran out of people to promote over me because no one stayed very long after getting promoted, which was a huge red flag, and had to give me a key so I could be a closing manager. Literally the only thing I was taught was to close out the register and how to set the alarm. When I locked up, I quit after being asked to come in on my day off to sign a formal write-up. My second within a week of my first. The first was for not submitting the inventory, which I was never taught to do, and had no idea other closing managers were doing because prior to my promotion, I was sent home once everything was cleaned and put away. And the second for not sending other employees home when sales dipped below X number of sales an hour, which again, I was never told to do, taught what the metric was. After 3 formal write-ups, you were fired. I told her, I'll save you the paperwork. I won't be coming back for a 3rd. Story 40. My coworkers turned on me, basically. A few of them needed a place to stay, so I offered to be roommates with them. Big mistake. For a short time, I was their boss, but the stress of the job wasn't worth it to me, so I stepped down. The next manager was trying to coerce people to come to work regardless if they were sick or not. I promptly told them they can't do that, and I had to simply deal with the workload when I was the manager if people suddenly called out of work. The leader bully of the coworkers didn't like that, and everyone took her side since they were convinced I was being disrespectful and a bully myself. One of the managers gave me an ultimatum and tried to make me accountable for the entire situation. But I was telling them I was trying to talk with people and figure out why they were upset, but I was literally being ignored by people, like actual childish silent treatment. So instead of dealing with that manipulation and abuse with people unwilling to have an adult conversation, I left. I left my job. I left my home. I got an easy recommendation from the owners for my next job too, since they didn't want to deal with the fallout of the massive mistake their managers made and documented for me. But I will forever be a bit miffed at how that situation turned out and how I got scapegoated for the whole thing. Story 41, my team and I exceeded a set earnings goal for the company and had a bonus dangled in front of us if we hit a certain amount above that target. The bonus amounted to about $5,000 each. I was the first to go in and ask my manager about the delivery date for our bonus checks. Bonuses were deposited separate from our normal paychecks, and the bonus hadn't arrived on the expected date. I was told that I must have misunderstood, and pizza was on its way. Ducked-up pizza parties are a trope for a reason. I'm not ashamed to admit that I lost my crap and started yelling at him. When that sleaze weasel closed the blinds, as if that would help, I flung the door open and mocked his open door policy. Obviously, no one clapped, but they stopped working to hear what was going on. "Duck you, Troy," was the last that employer heard from me. I went out to the parking garage and rage screamed in my car for a few minutes. During that time, several other people on my team joined me. We decided right away to withdraw as many court filings as we could before our auths were voided. There were some larger accounts, then went day drinking after. My supervisor somehow froze and didn't revoke our access right away. I guess he thought we would be lured in by midday pizza. It was super petty to set them up to refile those. But man, duck those guys. Story 42. My father passed away unexpectedly, and I had to leave the office immediately to travel back home. My manager called me the day of the funeral asking when I'd be back. When I came back, she lectured me on how I can't just drop things like that when something happens because people rely on me, even if it's my dad's passing and that I had to get over it, because it's a part of adult life and it will happen to all of us. I quit and have never seen HR scramble so hard to do damage control. This was just one of many horrible things she said to me while I worked there. Story 43. I got a job in binary options before anyone really knew it was a scam/gambling. They took us around on the first day to hear what the day-to-day was. I remember the top selling person on the team was a girl who was very charismatic on the phone, using buzzwords like retirement, investments, and stocks to get people to fork over money to basically guess if a stock would go up or down in a very short time frame. I very quickly realized this was a gambling scam being sold as investments. The manager also clearly realized I was having moral qualms. So on the third day, he called me into his office to talk to me. He basically told me that you have to do what you have to do to make a buck in this world. I wasn't interested in convincing old people to fork over their money to gamble on a lie, so I just walked out after my third day and did not show up the next day. Did not think that I owed anything to the people working there. Got the following email, which I never responded to. I think eventually they called me and I told them I would not be coming back. Everything okay? I tried calling because you haven't showed up for your shift. Please let me know. Never thought anything of it, but it was a very big scandal in my country a couple years after that. Story 44 seems to be a similar issues. You quit the manager? No, so much the job itself. We've all been there. Had one job that I only worked 2 days per week. I was in school. And instead of having me work from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., they kept pushing me to work 400 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., etc. Kept getting worse. Having hours is one thing, but driving for over 14 hours a day, 2 days in a row was kind of bad. I said that I can't maintain this, and they agreed to lower the amount of work. Nobody else was really having these long shifts, and when you're on the road and told where to go, you can't say no. A bunch of people that hired with me already quit earlier that month. This place didn't give 2 weeks notice. They just straight up fired people. I remained in contact with them after they were fired for no reason. Everyone knew it. I had enough one day, went into the manager's office and was polite but stated, "Hey, I was trying to explain that I can't keep staying on the road this long and not getting home until nearly 9 p.m. to be back here with little sleep. Sorry, but today was my last day." I had the uniform, paperwork, etc., and dropped it off. All I got was a, "What the hell, man? Sorry, had to do it." This is a terrible recalcitrance in every field. Bad leadership pushes the good people out. Story 45. I once worked at a check clearinghouse as a post-op trans woman where I was constantly harassed by a Chinese supervisor who kept masculinizing my first name, and when I told her off for doing it, her boss brought me in his office saying, "Now there are a lot of people, and not everyone's going to remember everyone's name," and he totally missed the point. She knew what my name was because I kept correcting her. I started calling him of his name, and he got mad to where I said, "Now you know how I feel." Then he let out a, "Not everyone is going to believe the same things you do because we come from different cultures, and you have to accept that like hell I do." I had nothing against her being Chinese, but she did for me being trans, and I constantly got harassed at work, and the company, EDS, just did not care. Then when I was working my ass off for incentive pay, they decided they didn't feel like paying me incentive pay anymore, so they collected all the errors I had for the past month and scored them in 1 week as penalties, so I'd lose all my incentive pay for the last 2 weeks, and gave me the notice after they took away about 1/2 of my paycheck by doing it. It was that moment that I just clocked out and went home. No notice, nothing. Story 46. I used to have a job that to this day I just refer to as my toxic job or the toxic place. I cannot stress enough how toxic it was on every single ducking level. Company called Quinn Street, just so you can be warned. The breaking point was twofold. I'd watched my upper manager totally stab into the back of the only useful manager in the building. The useful manager was problematic in other ways, but literally had the best sense of how to manage of anyone in the building. She made my manager look bad, and not in an intentional way. My manager would not discipline her horrible friend employees who were doing terribly at the job. The good manager was just the first person to bring the undeniable proof to the VP. To this day, I have no idea how my manager kept her job. If it wasn't bad enough that the one good manager got canned unfairly, there was an underling of hers who was the most useless human I've ever met. Good manager has been trying to get rid of her because she was completely incompetent. It wasn't hard for my manager to get the incompetent one to make up lies against good manager. So my boss not only got rid of the most useful person, but then promoted the useless person upwards as a gift of loyalty for helping get rid of the good manager. Story 47. After presenting them with a plan during COVID to transition the business online, they ignored me completely. Then, enacted about 80% of my plan while also allowing another employee to steal my learning materials for other employees and pass them along as his own work. When confronted with this, again, I was completely ignored. When I raised a handful of concerns with how things were going at the beginning of the pandemic, I was told to stop complaining and that I could be let go at any time. A few months later, when my daughter was born, a replacement was temporarily brought in to cover off my work. I had given them 9 months to hire them and offered to train them, give them what they need. I was ignored. 2 days after my wife gave birth, I had a handful of messages from the temp that I ignored as I was on leave and not being paid. The second in command wrote me a passive-aggressive email about how I needed to be available. That was the last straw. My parental leave was going to last a month. 2 weeks into it, I gave 2 weeks notice and refused every email and text and call they sent me unless it was specifically about receiving my final pay. I'm told, to this day, it is all but forbidden to speak my name, except in hushed tones and dirty looks. Story 48. Working in a factory that straight up told me their retention rate was very low during my interview. Red flag number 1, 12-hour days, 3 days a week, but the days were consecutive, so I was pretty exhausted for most of my days off because lack of sleep for 3 days straight sucks, but that wasn't horrible. Paid $15 are also not horrible. However, no benefits, insurance, etc. Was there a couple of months and heard a new management position opened up, and a few days later, someone I'd never seen before got the spot. So I asked one of the managers I was familiar with what the upward movement within the company looked like, and was told, oh, we no longer hire managers from within the company. This made me consider putting in my 2 weeks notice. The breaking point was when I wanted to go to a funeral and asked for some time off, and was told basically that I can't take time off for whatever reason, and if I left, I'd be fired that day. So I walked out at lunch and never came back. Started doing Uber Eats instead. They were failing to secure buyers for most of their products by the time I'd left anyhow. We had many months worth of material to sell, and were very quickly running out of storage space anyways. Pretty sure the company went under shortly after. Story 49. I was already on edge when they promised 5 weeks of hands-on training and then proceeded to abandon me at the front desk every single day. I would have to leave my spot and go back to the boss's office to ask questions, ones that she would just answer with no explanation of how she got there. I was not learning, and for someone who generally catches on quickly, it was making me feel dumb. But I was trying to stick it out. One morning before work, I stopped for gas and accidentally left my phone sitting on the back of my truck. I fully drove to work only a couple miles from the gas station before I realized. Rushed back to find it smashed in one of the exits, knowing it was probably me who ran it over driving back in. I grabbed it, went back to work sobbing, and was met with complete insensitivity. Told it was just a phone. Can't I buy another one? But I couldn't. This was my first job in months after being without work thanks to the pandemic. I made it halfway through the day, left for my lunch break, and decided I'd rather go back to waitressing. I blocked all their numbers and emails, changed out of my scrubs, and went applying. I got a job the next day that I stayed at for 3 years. Story 50. I was at Dollar General for a year and a half. I had 4 different bosses during my time there. I must have done something right if 3/4 managers were happy with me. The 4th and final one pretty much switched up. She started as a key holder. She was pretty much manager number 3. I had a friend that worked there who was assistant manager and became acting manager after my second boss quit. It was too much for her, so she quit. It was just me and the new lady. I wanted to leave too, but I stayed and helped her because she was new. We got a new boss, and he promoted her to assistant manager. After he left, she became my new boss. At first, it was going well, but then she hired a new group, and I had a hard time getting along with them because they wouldn't do their jobs. She started cutting my hours. I went from 25, 30 hours a week to just 5.5 hours. So I'd have only 5.5 hours to clean up a week's worth of work that no one did. Somehow I would do it, but then I'd be gone another week and have to do the same thing. When I didn't quit, she took me off the schedule completely without firing me. So I quit after finishing the last shift I was scheduled for. Story 51. I worked at an alcohol rehabilitation center. We got bought out by Lee Equity Firm, who told us they would do everything in their power to support us seconds before they started the reduction in force. They cut half our staff, cut our PTO, hired new leaders who didn't have good experience in the field, made policy changes that made no sense, and topped it off by preventing us from kicking out patients who got violent with staff or other patients, got high in the facility, or sold substances to other patients. They lost the professionals contracts for the airlines and railroads because of the drop in standards and quality, cut costs significantly on food in the facility, took away privileges of patients to get free snacks or order food so long as we inspected it first, and pressed hard on their Our Business name connivance store that was on the property, and cost 50 baht more compared to a gas station a quarter of a mile away. Final deciding factor for me, after multiple incidents of violence and even 2 SAS in my time there, they decided there was no sufficient evidence that we needed a security team on staff. Shortly after I left, one of the receptionists was violently attacked by a patient who didn't like it when she touched his bags. They still believe security is unnecessary. Story 52. I had to call out 2 days with no notice. My 3-year-old daughter was hospitalized, and there was no way in hell I was leaving her to go to work. I called in early before my shift and let her know I couldn't be there that day or the next. There was another lady that knew how to do my job, so they weren't screwed. After the 2 days, they called me into the director's office and tried to have me sign a contract that I would never call out again, or I would be fired with no severance or ability to get unemployment. Before that point, I had never called out before. It was an incredibly stressful job as it was, but it's not as if I had a habit of calling out randomly. I even worked extra on weekends for low-cost appointments. I blankly stared at her for a while and left. Called her later and told her she was ducking insane for even thinking of making me sign that. I gave her a real piece of my mind about how we were treated, and that contract really nailed it. I never went back. Honestly, ducked that place. Story 53. Restaurant server and bartender. Small fine dining restaurant only needing one server who can easily also be the bartender. First, he didn't want to pay me for training. Then he wanted me to deep clean his whole restaurant alone. This was like day 4. Out of the 2 weeks I was there, he showed up late 5 times by over an hour, and the restaurant was locked, so I had to sit outside and wait, sometimes in the rain. Breaking point. I realized he never broke down the tip out. So when I asked, he said, I tipped out 3% to chefs, fine, and 2% to bar. Wait, 2% to the bar. I'm the bar. I make the drinks, I take the orders. Where's is the 2% going? To the bar. Owner am the bar. Why am I tipping out myself, and when do I get my money back? Oh, well, every restaurant has a tip out to the bar. It goes to the bar budget. No, it's for the bartender. The chefs get their 3%, right? So you're just charging me to sell your drinks? He then said he understands and give him a couple weeks to talk to his business partner. I said, nope, quit, and harassed him for months to get the money he owed me. I had to call the government to get on his case. Story 54. I was doing time in a halfway house for 3 months, and during that time was allowed to get a part-time job if desired. They did have connections with a call center where we could apply, so I decided what the hell. I needed to make money somehow, and spot jobs were far and few between. Anywho, interviewed and got hired and showed up for my first day of training, only to be told the only trainer they had was out sick, so I just listened in, as one of the other workers took calls all day. Then after lunch, they had me transcribe voicemails and summarize the contents. That was a Friday, so I was off for the weekend. Went back Monday expecting real training, only to be told the trainer was still out. So I spent another day shadowing, transcribing. Then the next day, the trainer was finally there. And when I got through maybe the first hour of what they expected me to know, I realized this job wasn't for me. I felt bad, but basically went to the lady who was my boss and said I wouldn't be coming back. I'm used to being on my feet moving around all day. The idea of being stuck in a cubicle, listening to endless phone calls was not what I wanted to do. Story 55. My ex did this. She was hired at a nonprofit to help with business development, where she was tracking new leads and forwarding them to the rest of the BD team. Fast forward 6 months and they restructured. So she was now also helping with their Salesforce cloud-based financial tracking system. Her boss, the head of BD, was way out of her depth, so she had my ex creating financial reports for the CFO and CEO. 40 hours a week turns into 60 and then 70. They hired someone to create a Salesforce-driven department who really wanted my ex to transfer in. She was basically a shoo-in for the position. My ex went to her boss to talk about what her professional development would look like in her current role and was angrily dismissed. Her boss even told her, I just don't know why we even need to have this conversation, as she was leaving. So she applied. A week later, HR is calling her, saying she isn't qualified for the position, despite the fact that she's actively doing what the new position would require. The new would-have-been boss was flummoxed and pissed. Come to find out, her boss went behind her back to HR and told them to pull her application. Once we found that out, we sat on it for 48 hours, and she quit right after. Story 56. I lost my baby. Called out 4 hours before my shift, said I was going to the hospital. You better get a doctor's note. Showed up for my next scheduled shift 2 days later, and the first thing the manager said to me was basically, that wouldn't happen if you weren't having sex out of wedlock. Fought every instinct I had to punch that mother ducker right in the throat, and just walked out. 15 years later, I still occasionally debate if the assault charge would have been worth it. Story 57. I worked at McDonald's for 3 years, did what I had to. I ran the kitchen. My store had the highest accuracy, lowest errors in the entire district, and it was directly related to my work as I ensured orders were processed correctly. I wore a headset to hear drive-thru orders so I could be efficient, and regularly had to correct the girl taking the orders. She'd ring it up wrong. She cussed me out over the headset one day because she thought she was right, so I let her do it wrong. When the customer got the wrong food, I got attitude from the manager, and when I told him I made it as she had rung it up, he said I should learn to work with the girl who rang it wrong because she was getting promoted to manager. I put in my 2 weeks on the spot and never came in the next day. Story 58. When I was 18, I got a job in a giant grocery store as a cashier. I worked there a couple months and I hated it so much. Standing in one place for long periods of time was really hard on me for reason. I wanted to take my break mid-shift to break up my standing. They really screwed me on breaks and would constantly give me my break with 30 minutes left on my shift. Like, what's the point tight? I should also mention that this was a second part-time job while I worked a full-time job somewhere else. I'm scheduled Thanksgiving, but I can't remember exactly what time, so in the morning I called to find out. They had a rule that you could only get your schedule from a manager, So when I called, I asked to speak to a manager. This harpy gets on the phone, and before I can even say anything, she says, "You need a doctor's note to call out," in a tone dripping with disdain and attitude. I saw red. I didn't need this job, so I quit, with attitude, and slammed the phone down. All I wanted was to confirm what time I was working, stupid cow. Story 59. I was clear that I applied to the job because it was something that played to my strengths, which were focus on detail, enthusiasm for the fairly narrow task we were assigned, and familiarity with the program that was used. I was also clear that my attention was easily broken by excess noise, or having to split my focus between too many different tasks. After a year and a half, the company folded my department into one that processed orders and had to deal directly with customers over the phone and via email. We were moved out of the quiet room with plenty of desk space and noise-muffling cubicle walls and onto the customer service floor with telephones constantly going off, had to sit in quads with nothing to muffle others' conversations, and were expected to keep our previous pace while doing the additional tasks. No immediate raise, though we were promised a healthy one once the dust settled. The training for the new roles was lackluster, and the rules for order processing seemed to change every week. I powered through for a year, then had an intense anxiety attack and left over lunch the day after the promised raise panned out to one measly $1 an hour more. Story 60. It was destroying my marriage. The pay was excellent, and the perks of the job included paid vacations and trips all over the world to big resorts. But I started at 3 p.m. and clocked off at near midnight. I'd get up for the day, and my wife would be off to work already. I'd start at 3, she'd come home at 6 while I was working. She'd have dinner alone since I was working. She'd quietly read a book or play a game and I was working. She'd go to bed and I was working. I'd come to bed and accidentally wake her up, and we're both too tired to talk or do anything. It was like this for 2 years before I finally quit. I've been looking for a new job since, with little to no luck, but I don't regret quitting that job at all, because now I can spend time with my wife. She's my best friend, and I want her to come first. Story 61. Grocery store and going to college. I had given my school schedule to the scheduling manager months in advance. Day 1 of class, I get a call from my boss. "Where are you?" "In class, I gave you my schedule. You were scheduled to work." "IDK what to tell you, I'll come in after class." Went straight to his office, after class. Handed him a second printout of my schedule. 1 week later, phone rings in class again. I don't answer. Call in after class. "Where are you?" "What do you mean you have my schedule?" Printed the schedule a third time, gave it to them that day. Following that day, he then called me 2 more times in class. I told him one last time, "I've provided 3 copies of my school schedule. You said you would work around it. I will no longer answer my phone if you call while I am in class." He got very upset and defensive, to which I said, "I have done my part. You do yours." He called me again the following week on a Friday. My buddies happened to be having a concert in a nearby city. Instead of going in after class, I went to the concert. Went to Pizza Hut the following day. Started delivery the following Thursday. Story 62. I worked for LG once. They literally timed everything you did to the second, including bathroom breaks. I got scolded for being one mere 40 seconds late back from lunch. Last straw was being yelled out for severing a customer after they refused to provide some personal information they insist we collect with each call. Story 63. I actually just quit my job without notice a few weeks ago. I worked doing insurance billing and posting for a small family-owned dental practice. My office manager, who was, of course, the dentist's wife, made my life a living hell. She was an expert at micromanaging and passive aggression. She sent me condescending messages ending with winky faces that implied I didn't know how to do my job, but also didn't do her job at all, to the point where I had to ask multiple times for her to write patient refund checks or double-check my chart audits. I have no idea what she worked on during the 40 hours a week she was at the practice, other than micromanaging the schedule and asking me stupid questions that I'd already answered. She also implemented a policy that effectively meant we were stealing money from patients who had long-standing credit balances, and that was it for me. I'm not helping you basically steal money that you've truly owed the patient for over 6 years. The practice itself has a credit balance report showing almost $55,000 they currently have that is likely other people's money. They're lucky I just wrote a scathing 6-page resignation letter and didn't report them to the state treasury. Story 64. After returning to work after a nasty bout of COVID, still recovering from the symptoms and already intimidated by the workload I'd returned to, I got chewed out by my boss about how much of a disappointment I was for not being at the same level as my coworker. The coworker in question was my supervisor, who had a degree and 8 years of experience in the field. I had only started getting trained on it by that supervisor 3 months prior. I did not have any formal education, and I was also training the receptionist in my previous role during that 3 months. Yeah, all I could see ahead after that meeting was that I would be miserable. I was already behind due to the COVID and knew the next month or so I'd be pressured to work crazy hours. all for some a-holes with completely unrealistic expectations who won't be satisfied anyway. I packed up my stuff and quit on the spot the next day. And that supervisor I was being compared to, he was also a complete a-hole who I was regularly bumping heads with personality-wise. But when I told him I was leaving, he was like, "Yeah, I get it." And that meeting was kind of ducked up. Good luck to you. Story 65. I worked for a company that printed art on canvas. Some of the owner's paintings, but mostly bought off Dreamstime and sold. The factory printing and showroom location I worked in was in Brisbane, and then owners went for holiday to Melbourne. So they locked the printing area part of the business and took the key with them. The factory area also had the bathroom and kitchen. In a Brisbane summer, I had no access to water or a bathroom, and the building only had fans, no aircon. So super ducking, hot, and humid. On top of that, the 2011 storms happened, and the SES, State Emergency Service, were telling businesses in the area to close up and send staff home in preparation for the storm. So I closed up and left. The owners called and Karened me out for leaving, saying it wasn't that bad. It actually was that bad. Look it up if you're so inclined. When the roads were open, the owners were still in Melbourne. I swung by, put the key under the door, and emailed to say I no longer worked for them and that I had returned the key. Cue surprised Pikachu face. They were giant holes in everything, so it's no less than they deserved. Story 66. Turn of the century. The company's design lead and I had been working for months on the new website. It was approved and everything was on track for the switch in a week or so. Boss calls me to his office, shows me the website a reporter had built using a Microsoft front page default template, and tells me he wants that deployed instead. I argued for a bit about why a website with our brand identity woven throughout it in clean, compact HTML was better than a bloated template with our logo added into a corner, but in the end realized I was getting nowhere. So I just told him, I realize it's your company, and you'll get the website you want, but you'll have to ask Reporter to deploy it because I'm not doing it. I quit. He said he hoped I would reconsider, but I had my letter of resignation typed and signed that same night. It was on the dashboard when I had an accident on my way to work the next morning. I was off with pay for 3 weeks, and on the day I was cleared to go back to work, I got an offer for a job that paid me 3x as much. Story 67. Was put on for a week of doubles at this BBQ spot. I helped open at the request of a good friend who was going to be one of the managers there. I went to talk to her about it, and she said, in the most disheveled way possible, that corporate didn't give her the hours and half the staff had called out with COVID. Some actually had it, and others were using it as an excuse to get no questions asked vacation time. One look at the schedule showed that she was right. Pretty much everyone except the high school students were getting ducked just as bad as I was. I made it 3 days before the next week's schedule posted, and I saw that I was another week of doubles. I went to bed with the ringer off and texted them about halfway through the following workday that they wouldn't see me in that day or at all. Within 3 months, 100% of the original staff had turned over and the GM was institutionalized after having a complete mental breakdown. That job single-handedly tanked 6 years of success in food service for me. I work in an office setting now and could not be happier or better paid. Story 68. After 3 years at a call center, I just was done. They had been bought out by a VC and putting insane pressure on us to increase sales, except we were mostly there to serve customers and whatnot. We didn't cold call, and most people calling us had a problem. Some had questions. Nonetheless, I had improved my sales numbers and was top 10 in the group of 50 of us. They gave me my new numbers and said I needed to increase sales by 20% or I was going on a PIP. This was after they had increased prices on their services by like 25. So our sales company-wide were dipping because all of a sudden the value was a lower. Repeat customers were canceling. I very obviously was not going to meet my goal, and they put me on a PIP. I quit on the spot. They tried to walk the PIP back, saying they could change what it was for, then not have it at all. I told them that the call I took before the meeting was the last I would ever take for them. It was satisfying, and I'm in a way better place now. $20 HR wasn't worth that hell. Story 69. Had the same big box store part-time job from age 16, 21 years old and left on good terms for a job kind of adjacent to what I trained for. A few years later, my new job had a slow period one summer but backed the hours for part-timers. So I reapplied to the old job as store grunt, carry out heavy stuff, rally up the carts, clean messes. Near the end of the summer, the main job was going to reclassify those of us who were cut back as full-time, so I wasn't going to need the old job anymore, and wrote up a nice 2-week resignation letter. When I handed in my resignation to the on-duty manager, he was all pissed off, saying, "You can't leave, this place is your main job, not any other place." And I couldn't not laugh. He asked me what was so funny, and I replied, "I make more than double at my other job and just got reclassified as full-time. This place was never my main source of income." Took the letter back and just said I won't be back to finish out my 2 weeks just because of how he reacted. I know I burned that bridge, but it was so satisfying. Story 70. I have a very string aversion, to put it mildly, to wet paper. I worked in a restaurant that did shift meals before service, which was awesome, and the food was very good. I worked 2 jobs, opening shift at a small coffee bar, out by 2 p.m. and then off to go home and change into my black and whites as a server in this elaborate and expensive upscale cold side array of appetizers. So I knew I could get dinner at my second job at said restaurant. Things started getting dicey financially for the restaurant, and corners started being cut. One day I came in and our shift medal was a great smelling and looking bouillabaisse. Yum! I set up my station as the cold app server for the night and went to sit down when staff dinner was ready. It was served on cheap, uncoated paper plates because the owners didn't want to pay for the hot water to wash the staff's plates. Basically, chunky seafood soup served on typing paper. Luckily, it was payday. So I picked up my last check and straight up ghosted. Apparently, it took a couple of hours into dinner service for everyone to realize I wasn't coming back. Story 71. I worked as a cart pusher plus supply restocker plus cleaner at a Fred Meyer for about 6 months. I would go home exhausted with my shirt stained from sweat. I started to dread going into work. Front-end manager would try to call me into work on my days off and pulled me into the office, telling me I need to be more of a team player. Then around Black Friday, Christmas time, someone brought in a respiratory virus. Everyone called out, so it was just me and another cart pusher having to shovel snow while coughing up our lungs. I admit I was already burning out and had some IRL issues going on to deal with attendance, but I got pulled into the office and told I was on thin ice. So I finished up my shift and NCNs out of frustration. That was my last job I had, coasting on my savings from my previous job, before caregiving for my dad and then dealing with surgeries and chemo for cancer. Leaving out a lot, I feel I worked very hard for them in that short amount of time, and I will never put in that much effort again. Lesson learned. Let your employees ducking rest JFC. Story 72. I was working in PC World and spent 6 hours moving the printer paper to a different dial on the instructions of the manager. 400 boxes, each containing 1,500 pieces of paper, so about 5 metric tons, all moved by hand because it had all been taken off the pallets and put on the shelves. As soon as I finished, the manager decided he liked it better where it was originally. Story 73. I've done this a few places. My first was in a call center. I was there for 4 years. They slowly started taking away the various daily duties I was in charge of that kept me off the phones and finally moved me to a Tier 2 supervisor because they were short-staffed on the phone. Everyone had over 100 cases, manageable as 30 to 40, as I used to assign cases to reps. After a few weeks of it, I went in early one morning, grabbed my stuff, handed my badge to security, and left before anyone on the floor saw me. My most recent was because my brother died, and I just was not functional. For about a month and a half, I sat on my couch with my laptop, just staring out the back door of my house. I broke down crying in the middle of my living room one day, then ran to the bathroom to stress vomit, and I decided that was it. Everyone was super understanding. My manager, RBP, and VP of my team all told me to come back when I was ready. That was January, and I'm still putting myself back together before jumping back in the workforce. Story 74. I lost my job in March when my employer went bankrupt. I got a new job at a car dealership in June, moving service cars. Everyone working there was such a ducking martyr. Part of my job was to say, hey, you've got an APPT here. And a few of them would always piss and moan about much more work they had to do than everyone else. The tipping point came when I had already decided I was going to quit 2 weeks in, but I decided to give it another week. The day I decided to give it another week was a ducking disaster. I got Karened at by a third-party service vendor for not coming to work an hour before my shift. I had to ask other employees for keys for 3 hours before they checked a second drawer and found them. And the number of things I hadn't been taught in advance was disgraceful. At the end of the week, I brought my work supplies back and dismissed everyone who tried to ask me what was going on. The next day, I got another job offer. Story 75. I was working at an AT&T call center not too long ago. When I started, I was super optimistic about it, thinking I would have no issues taking calls. Well, come to find out, I was very wrong. About 2 weeks after our training, when we started taking calls, I could feel myself getting more and more depressed. Finally, one day I got a call from a customer who said she believed all of us should pass. Then I started thinking it wouldn't be so bad if I just died. Then at least I wouldn't have to go back to answering calls. Then that's all I could think about. Well, if I just die, it won't be bad anymore. I had that thought for weeks until one day I decided that being a loving wife meant more to me than some stupid job dealing with stupid people. So I walked outside for my 15-minute break and just never went back in. Now I work with kids with autism, went back to school to get my bachelor's, and have a plan to get my master's in ABA therapy. I'm so happy I walked out of that place. Story 76. I was averaging 43 hours or so a week at a company that rhymes with care and network. You have to badge in and out every day, and if you walk between buildings for a meeting, that time isn't counted in the system. I had a couple days where I had 7 HCRs, 58 minutes clocked in, and I got called out for not working 8 hours a day, even though my average was above 40 per week. I was told to make sure I get my 8 hours. Also, no work outside of the office was ever included, so I uninstalled their work profile from my phone and would ignore every work-related phone call outside of my working hours. I also would start a 7HR 58-minute timer the moment I badged in. Then once it went off, I would walk out of meetings, even if I was leaving them, pack my crap and go home. After they did like 10 rounds of layoffs, and I was unfortunately never included, I gave my badge and computer to a manager of a different department who sat near me and left one day. Story 77. I was working as a cupcake cake decorator for a small-ish, not really small cafe/bakery here in Michigan. If you know Blake's, then you know. Anyways, a couple years back, my brother was in the hospital for heart failure, and around this time, my boss yelled at me inches from my face for messing up a cake design. I literally followed along the order on the form. The customer was very wishy-washy and flip-flopped on what she wanted. I was severely stressed out because my brother almost died. I ended up going to the bathroom and cried on the phone with a friend who was an AM for 10 minutes. After that, for the next couple of weeks, I was quiet towards my boss and gave her short, quick-to-the-point answer. One day, it was just me and her, short-staffed, and I had to not only decorate hundreds of cupcakes, but I had to take cupcakes out of the oven, make sandwiches, donuts for the customers, coffee, and check them out. All I got after that was $20 Target gift card. I quit on a Friday and only let a few coworkers know. Story 78. Worked front desk checking in and out. 6 different specialty doctors' offices for about 2 years, including through COVID. Had 2 other people at the desk with me over time, neither of whom were very good at their jobs, but would at least help with patient load. One of the others gave her 2-week notice and the other up and quit with a text about a week later, which would have left me handling all the work of all 6 clinics alone until they hired people. When I voiced my worries about my ability to handle everything on my own, I was given generic platitudes from my bosses. Don't worry, you've got this and we're here to help, which they never ever were in any other situation. This was on top of closing the hospital for emergency weather in 21, with a real state of emergency in my state, but not paying anyone who didn't work that day, because they were worried the others who had been stuck there during the storm would complain. We had to use vacation time or just eat the days. Said, nope, and typed up my resignation, cleared out my desk, and left. Story 79. In assisting a corrupt district manager, I was covering multiple locations, working 100 hours a week, and was promised a bonus from the store. I was covering the most, Max, V, the other stores which I was working to help. Bonus time came around. Got bonused at every crafty store, except my main that I worked the most at. I gave the DM my notice immediately when she said my bonus was $0. She acted shocked and couldn't believe I would do such a thing. I said I would rescind my resignation if I maxed out like $6,500 for the quarter. She said she needed weeks to work it out. I said, you have 24 hours. She then said, well, you have no proof I said that, etc. I showed 3 emails stating very specifically what she promised. I ended up leaving 2 days later, emailed the CEO of HR and regional HR with a 9-page email outlining everything. They caved, gave me my bonus, offered to pay me out my vacation, which wasn't a thing if I came back. I did. Let the money hit the account and left. DM got fired 3 days later. Story 80. I worked as a stalker at a retail clothing outlet for 4 years, delivered the highest work averages, think 150 items per hour as an average rate. My average was twice that. And as I learned to work more efficiently, my average ended up being 600 items per hour. I ended up leaving cause distance, became an issue as I was moving, and I found something much better and remote, and also 4 years, and my raises collectively didn't even reach $1 above minimum. Found great success with a new thing, but found myself always at home. My old boss, who I had good rapport with and was a friend at the end, called practically said they needed me, that no one was able to keep up with the workload, and so I said I would for a measly 12 hotter. They agreed, and so after I signed the paperwork and all that to come back, I looked over the details because I had an off feeling and saw they put me as minimum wage and seasonal and just forgot to mention they couldn't accommodate my ask. Walked out the first hour on principle. Story 81. I was hired as an enrollment advisor with plans to move me into an area I have skills and expertise in called MTSS with the promise of a raise. Enrollment advising turned quickly into sales attainment with no commission. When the fall came, I was offered a position alongside MTSS, sent an offer letter for said poison with 0 pay increase, was strong-armed into singing the doc, and started the fall with 2 roles, same crafty pay and no raise. In the MTSS role, My boss had no knowledge of what she was doing, and the team never took any of my advice. I was assigned 4 hours of tutoring day, still advising, and doing a separate role that involved a ton of travel and planning. It came to a head when they started micromanaging my hours worked as a salaried employee. They were having me fill in every 15 minutes of my day worked into the calendar. Luckily, I already saw the writing on the wall and had a great job lined up. Called and quit over the phone one morning and never looked back. Duck those guys. Story 82. I don't have enough time to tell the whole story, but hearing the director of my boss's boss caring about how I needed help, and I was told she was the only one who could help. She said I shouldn't ask someone 2 levels above me. Using a woodworking machine, and another time that I needed help moving an empty table. Having one of the classes I was teaching hijacked by my boss. Being put on a PIP that we all knew I couldn't do. My boss leaving me to be trained by everyone else when she went on her honeymoon, my first week. And then yelling at me because she couldn't not take out her divorce on me for some reason. Being hired for one job and then doing everything but what I was hired to do. Repeatedly being put in situations I clearly outlined that I felt unsafe, untrained, and uncomfortable in. Quitting was the most terrifying but liberating choice. I am still healing years later and undoing the tremendous damage it did to my mental health, but I'm happier and healthier now. Story 83. My manager was on maternity leave and the assistant acting manager kept looking for things to write people up about. When it was my turn to get written up for one time, being less than 5 minutes late, I accepted it but warned them about being intolerant. A few weeks later, I had to call off a shift due to a family emergency, and the manager's response was, I'd have to find my own coverage or I'd be written up. I had worked through illness, stress, bad scheduling, and when my car broke down, I walked to work. I had only called off one shift before in 3 years, and nobody wanted to cover a closing shift on a Friday. I called back 15 minutes later and quit with half a day's notice. It felt good. I had a better paying job within 2 weeks and have never been written up anywhere since.